so many participants today already, at least from my side in the morning. I'm Marcus. I'm a PhD student in Leipzig, Tom as well. And I have a small presentation also for today's session, nothing too big. The title, you see it hopefully already. Wait, no, you also see this breakout room stuff. Do you see that as well right now, which you shouldn't see? Can you give me a sign on that? I will just do it like this. What?
I just see the presentation.
We don't, yeah, we only see your PowerPoint.
Okay, that's perfect. So the title of today's session was Participatory Action Research in Organizational Contexts, Promises, Pitfalls, and Strategies. I want to start straight with the structure. We can also know what to expect right now. I just want to give a short introduction to the session because we don't have any other kind of inputs or interventions today. And this introduction will be mainly about also, let's say, not the promises, but rather about the pitfalls. And also not so much about the strategies. I would just say what I encountered in my own research, and then I would open the floor shortly for you, identifying more of your pitfalls or maybe also strategies. Then I would suggest going into breakout rooms. I designed preliminarily, based on the number of registrations, quite a couple of breakout rooms. And yeah, you will see them from the presentation that follows, from the introduction, what they are, but then we can also add another one if you have other priorities. Then I would suggest a small reporting from the breakout rooms over to a general discussion. And then last point, we can see how long we should do that. What next? And I think even if you yourself don't do yet any kind of participatory action research, I think you can still contribute. I can say from the very beginning that I'm inspired by participatory action research, but I don't call what I do participatory action research myself for some reasons that you might identify in the next minutes. I want to start first with a couple or two quotes that I find very interesting in this regard as well. One is from the Community Economies Research and Practice page of webpage. The key question for us around community is whether the dynamics of being together are obscured and made difficult to challenge and change, or whether they are made explicit and open for collective negotiation and transformation. In other words, is the ongoing making of community a truly democratic process. And the other one is from the Handbook of Diverse Economies. It is as important to recognize, for example, the extent of involvement of modern-day slavery in global capitalist supply chains and actions to expose and eradicate it, as it is to identify the extent of cooperativism and practices of mutuality and actions to support them. We will hopefully come back to these two quotes as well. So when I designed this session, I wrote this PIR in organizational contexts. And I think organizational context is a very broad label because I guess everything that people do has to do with some form of organizing, maybe not with a membership-based organization, but organizing, I think many people could relate. I thought in the beginning that would be a weakness, but maybe it's also strength because I guess maybe it's a bit more open this way. But I can say I personally, from my research experience or from my own research, had more this kind of formal membership-based organizations in mind, especially enterprises, many of which in the iceberg would be rather on the top rather than below. Another, at least for me, interesting question was I often encounter in these papers, sometimes also in longer books, this issue of participatory action research. And it seems like many people in CERN employ it, but how exactly that work out is not so much usually written about, especially I can totally understand in some journals. There's probably no time for discussing some struggles with this. But how it exactly works is just something I would love to figure out with others, especially because I have sometimes the impression like it just works so perfectly to employ this participatory action research, but why is this not the case for me? And then I have also in my own research this, let's say, theoretical ambition, which is maybe also important to understand with my enterprise research. So we saw this definition of a community, which is the negotiation of being in common. And I thought maybe, you know, even for enterprises, there might be some kind of community aspects involved. Not everything maybe what the company or enterprise does, but maybe there are some aspects. And even going further beyond that, I was thinking maybe not only the individual enterprise itself could be considered as some kind of community, but also the wider, let's say, chain or web of life in which is embedded could be some kind of a, you could maybe even say value community, maybe that doesn't share one and the same value, but that negotiates these kind of values of being in common. And the practical ambition for me was then also to especially with regards to participatory action research, to have more this kind of eye-level research instead of, let's say, more traditional modes of conducting research. I myself work with enterprises in Armenia and Georgia that employ themselves a discourse of community, social or environmental impact. Shortly about the promises, but I guess the promises you probably also know yourself or could even add to that. Participatory action research is oriented towards change, and that's why I think it also works pretty well together with community economies and the concern of performativity. It tries to complicate also the research binaries and tries to argue for more equal terms in case of developing already the research questions, choosing the methods that should be employed, and also tries to go away from it's only like the one researcher who does the data collection and the data evaluation, but that if that could also be done more equally. And I think another term that pops up at least quite frequently within CERN or elsewhere is also this notion of co-design. And this then also leads them to the final comment that the research objectives are then also more attuned towards, you name it right now, the co-researchers, probably not the researched anymore. And I think this is really like a big promise of participatory action research. But then there are at least some pitfalls, and these are, as I said, from my own experience of doing enterprise research in Armenia and Georgia from Leipzig. Where I didn't see where I just faced very many obstacles. And so doing although I was very much inspired by it. So first of all, and maybe some of you have a similar situation, I applied to a pre-written project proposal that was already granted about organizations. And this project started very much with the gaps in the literature and not so much of the concerns of the organizations, because at that point, we didn't even know who they would be. And then the question already starts at this point, which for me is not non-trivial. So with which kind of legitimacy or for what kind of purpose are we doing this actually from Leipzig? And yeah, who benefits from it, basically? And then we decided already in the beginning that it should be 6 to 8 companies with whom I shall engage. That means I spend usually 2 weeks maximum at one company. And then also the question is like, if I only spend so little time with an enterprise, is it actually really desirable to do some kind of participatory action research? I mean, in the worst possible words I could find, it could be also at least seen also as this kind of helicopter research, people coming quickly, doing their research and then selling it as participatory action research, trying to make some kind of interventions. Then also which kind of participation, let's say that both applies to the participation of what is usually called the research, but also the researcher. I have to say that my tasks that I did were sometimes not really helping me with, let's say, my broader ambition. On the other hand, I was also willing to take on jobs that maybe bring not me too much further with my own research. On the other hand, the tasks I had in mind, well, in the sense of collective data collection, was something that was not really, let's say, received very positively. And I think one of the main issues for that was time. So working with enterprises means sometimes working with very busy people with a tight schedule. And I also thought in this regard, earning sometimes 20 times more than the people working in these companies, you know, like why should they even be involved in kind of data collection? I think it's better to have them maybe only a kind of interview, which is shorter, which doesn't take so many of their times and resources. And then, of course, this adds up to this whole issue of relevance, like for whom does this research really matter? Sometimes I had my issues also to explain not only about the research, but also the kind of methods I tried to use to be a bit more engaging, how that could be relevant for the company. And here we come also to this issue of habits that I, sometimes just would not find, that I just would fall back to reenacting this kind of research division, because many of my interlocutors, they told me like, okay, collective drawing, that's a very nice idea, but I have no idea how to do it. And actually, I don't want to do it. I can tell you something about my enterprise. This is something they felt a bit more comfortable with, to let's say, going back to this, I tell you something and you can use it for your research, which I was actually not too much interested in, but I often got back to this kind of thing. So then another big issue for me was that I had usually contact with CEO and management in organization with, you know, bigger formal hierarchies. And I think that matters profoundly in the sense also of access having to more marginalized. And lastly, and maybe more interestingly, I was also troubled actually to some extent by the attractiveness of the community economies language. And if participatory action research could potentially contribute to care washing or greenwashing, whatever you want to call it, if you kind of too easily reproduce also the discourses of some of the management positions. So I have, for example, one company that is very environmentally clean, but there seem to be some very big issues with actually social conditions of work and the working conditions. So I'm also, of course, wondering about the performativity of that. So now I want to let's say, summarize this kind of issues that I identified, and based on the pre-registered people, I came up with this 5 possible breakout rooms. Given that we are a bit less than we are registered, I think we can also have only 4 of them. So I have these 5 issues identified based really on my kind of experience. The first I named projectification of academia. And here the question would be how to involve organizations in the application process or formulation of research questions. As I told you, we didn't do that at all in our research. I think there is this kind of idea that you should already, especially in also the post-colonial literature, to involve communities, organizations already from the beginning on, but I'm not sure where you are based if that's actually realistic, given how you work. And I'm also not sure if it's desirable. And then there also, of course, pops up this issue of remuneration, who gets what. And maybe it's not only about talking about money here, of course, that would be maybe weird from community economy scholars, but it's also an issue that should be not completely overseen. The second thing I had in mind was researchers as initial outsiders in participatory action research, and how to sell this kind of participatory action research thinking to organizations that did not yet encounter it, and how to gain the trust or access also for this kind of research. And then again, thinking about myself, I mean, why should we actually, if I think about myself as a northern researcher doing so in the South, maybe there are also other constellations you can talk about that you think might be also problematic to do this kind of participatory action research. And then for me, at least, also very important or interesting are these democratic deficits. So we had this quote in the beginning about community as this democratic decision-making of well-being. But if there are some hierarchies, if there are some democratic deficits, like how to engage with the marginalized perspective. Here I thought even about subgroups if there are more, but I'm not sure if you really need that. Finally, then also these dark sides of participatory action research performativity with the issues of carewashing, greenwashing, and how to also circumvent that organizations might instrumentalize the community economies, language and word, but not really in practice. At least I don't want to contribute being a purple person that, you know, makes community economies this kind of concept that can be used by companies also for the greenwashing activities. And the last one related to the second quote in the beginning, this negotiation of well-being, enabling methods to discuss problematic aspects. So this is also something at least I struggle with. Yeah, this would be my kind of idea about how to proceed from here. And maybe already right now I can stop the presentation, send you already a link to the pad, and maybe if the first ones want to maybe simply comment also how they identify with these 5 issues, feel free to do so. I just sent the link in the chat, but this would be my small introduction. And here you can see right now this pad. Maybe you can simply all open also the pad where I just listed these 5 different breakout rooms, but we are right now, let's see, 9, 11 persons. Prior is soon out, so we are 10. I don't think we would need 5 breakout rooms. But maybe just for the very beginning, if we can shortly summarize, if people can relate, especially with 1 or 2 of these aspects, and maybe we can already figure out which kind of groups we want to work with in the breakout rooms.
Hi, Marcus.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, please.
Okay, no, I just wanted to thank Marcus for this introduction, and maybe just quickly, so I totally resonate with this idea. I mean, with what you said, and for me, sometimes I see, let's say, participatory action research or participatory research in general as the next frontier of extractivist research. And because, as you were saying, you really ask much more time than a simple interview. And not only time, but you really ask people to put themselves at play or in the play and to question themselves and to reflect much more. And also if you put, I mean, for instance, if you have like a participatory workshop or so, I mean, people means that they have to interact also with other people within power, I mean, specific power relation and hierarchies. And this is extremely a lot to ask. So I sometimes have the feeling that, yeah, it's a way to ask more to participants. So I think it's, and then sometimes it would even be better to have a traditional research where the researcher is, it's clear the role, that it's separate from the researched. And because it takes much less time to the people with whom you are working, and in some way, sometimes it feels fairer to take on us the burden of thinking of what is the relevance of thinking what should be the research question, and do all these reflection. It's sometimes it can even be like a kind of outsourcing of work, right? So yeah, I think it's very, very I mean, we should super carefully reflect on what is the added value for them to have such a proceeding that takes a lot of time and energy from them. So it's just a reflection, but thank you for the very rich reflections and in the introduction.
Yeah, thank you very much also for your reflections on this. Yeah, maybe some others want to I don't know, have some more additional issues they want to especially raise here, or they came with some kind of expectations that we would raise these kind of issues here, or otherwise maybe we can, I don't know, shortly kind of see which breakout rooms you would prefer to go. And I would say the minimum amount of people there should be 2, but if you feel uncomfortable with that, I mean, we could make it 3 or even more. But yeah, is there anything I maybe also missed that you would like to address, and see if others are as much keen to address an issue?
Sorry, I'm just out walking the dog, so I hope it's not too loud. But thank you, Marcus, for your presentation. It was really well done. This is sort of new to me, participatory action research. I haven't worked with it before, but I was really inspired from the summer school to sort of try to incorporate elements of it into my research. But yeah, I'm really curious, sort of like, yeah, why should we do that? Like, who is it for? Is it because it sounds fun for the researcher to sort of get to interact in this way? Which was part of it for me, like, oh, this sounds more fun. But of course that can be problematic. But I'm curious because you mentioned that you don't call it participatory action research for yourself. And I'm wondering if you're going to come back to that, sort of what you actually do call it. Thank you.
Yeah, I will shortly only address that I don't have a name yet for it, but I refrain from it simply because I'm not doing that. Therefore, or at least not from the super strong definition of being really in equal terms and all this kind of stuff. That's not the case. And yeah, I also want to have this. I think it has a role. And for me, interesting is like if also other people are really working with these more hierarchical organizations. But even if it's not hierarchical, there will be still, as Otavia has probably said, there will be some kind of power relations. So there's always a kind of, let's say, interesting thing going on with this participatory stuff. But maybe I will leave it here, and Eva has raised her hand as well.
Hello, everyone. We can continue in the rooms, but I just wanted to thank you for the very good presentation, and just to acknowledge that I come with the business studies background, and at the moment I'm studying social movements, which is completely different, that I am with the movement doing the work, and it's in practice par. But then my challenges are to do with how to communicate this perhaps to others. But I completely have been there to most of the things that you have brought up in relation to the very hierarchical organizations and gaining access and gaining time. And that's one of the reasons I turned to social movements with this type of research. But thank you for this. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Shall I then just also thank you very much for sharing also your background, because I think we both at least didn't get to know each other before too much. So it's interesting also to see that there are other people who at least have this background. But yeah, I also see right now with organizations or with business organizations, I'm not sure if that's really worth doing it. But maybe I would just open then, if I don't hear any other voices right now, to these breakout rooms. And we will see what will happen. I mean, if we end up all in one room, that would be a bit weird, but maybe we can somehow make it that it's 2 plus something like this. I will just open them right now. You see also then these pads. You can use the pads to just write also a bit about what you're discussing, and then in the end you would choose one person who would maybe report back. I think the back reporting can be then also done a bit faster than I envisioned. So I started right now. You should see it, I think, close to these 3 dots. You should see the breakout rooms. And yeah, just go wherever you think. Of us is back. I would say we can do the reporting around 5 minutes per group. You can maybe look at the watch. I'm not sure how you decided it, if you do it collectively or if you choose a person. We will, I guess we will somehow manage it. I would just say we go with the numbers, and we start with the group where Claudia and Eva were, and then let's say the big group, number 2, and then number 4, right? Okay, then I'll hand over to Claudia and Eva first.
Shall I start, Eva, and then you can add in? Yeah, so both of us have talked about experiences with activist groups and the kind of navigating and negotiating the differences between working in an embedded way with an activist group who are totally engaged with the PAR process, and then the difference between that and a kind of academic project, and how you negotiate the differences or not, or yeah, and also the different interests between the organizations that you're a part of, and how you might even get lost as a researcher, that you're having to negotiate where your own interests are in relation to these other groups. Very easy to as a response to your privilege as a researcher, to feel that you should be serving the research project, the groups that you're working with, the businesses or whatever. And we discuss the differences between working in an activist way and with business and enterprises as well. Eva, do you want to add something to that?
Thanks. I will have a look at our notes. So I think it was very curious that both of us have been very much embedded in activist groups as researchers, and doing sort of from bottom up participatory action research, where it's everything quite organic with the group and with the people. And both of us have had or are in the process of having experience from working in the business school, and Claudia especially with PAR as a method now in this project, and this is the sort of position where our observations stemmed from. And then what we discussed a bit was also the making visible our because working with participatory methods, it stems from the needs of the people who you are working with, and the other than people as well, other than humans. But then within academia, you might need to translate things again, like what happened with this project. And it's I was just sharing that from my colleagues, that they have felt some that they are doing like the double work, and especially when institutionally this type of method might not be supported, or the funding might be given to something else, then you have to do it sort of off the radar in a way. So not always easy. And is there something we would like to finish off? Some highlights from our discussion.
Maybe also the others, I just thought about it, the others, if they have something to add or to ask, you can also do that. Goodbye, Tom.
Claudia was mentioning also about the people that you are going to collaborate with and some sort of tensions with the content. And now I'm thinking of the business model issue. Would you still like to share that?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, these are members of our advisory network that are kind of helping us think about how we might engage. And certainly from talking to members that are connected with minoritized groups, they have a slightly different perspective. So the project is looking at alternative business models in the creative tech sectors, and people closer to minoritized groups or members of minoritized groups have been talking to us about that there seems to be a sort of prevalence to try and push minoritized groups into not-for-profit and alternative models, when actually their questions are, well, you know, if we're kind of pushed to the edges anyway, perhaps we actually want the resources in the mainstream, and we want actually a piece of the mainstream pie, even if temporarily, because we've been we're more precarious just in survival mode, and that why should we be pushed into working in a not-for-profit way, etc. I don't know if that makes sense, but there's some quite interesting tensions there, and we haven't started the proper work yet, but I think there's some interesting questions. And certainly my own interest is on social transformation and not just, enabling people to create capital. So it's a tricky issue, I think. And especially, and also with the outsourcing, they really have already expressed to me these issues with previous participatory work that research that they've been involved with, that often they feel that their labor is kind of outsourced. It's a lot of work. They're being asked, a lot of things have been asked of them. So I really relate to that point Tavia made earlier as well.
If I may just shortly ask, before maybe going also to the other group first, did you have for this issue of, let's say, the minoritized groups wanting some access to the cake, the mainstream cake, if you have already developed some kind of strategies, or if you just tried something out, how to deal with this at this moment?
No, because it's really at the beginning of the project. So no, we haven't got any further than that, but it's just interesting that these tensions and discussion points are surfacing, and I'm not sure quite what we're going to do yet, but yeah.
Otherwise, if nothing else would pop up, I would just thank you and would hand over maybe to the other, I think it was second group then.
Yeah, I guess I can start unless Julie, you would like to start, because the two others have left actually. Right? Yeah. Okay.
Sorry. Go ahead. I'm
okay.
Just getting back home, so go ahead.
I will just, I will just try to make some points, but I will not be comprehensive for sure. It was a very nice discussion. And just going through the notes. So one point was about like the value for the participants. And Will was saying that in his university, it seems that this idea of value for participants reduces to remuneration, and then like paying people for doing the research, and then like other aspects of possible value to them are actually neglected, right? So, and then we also had the discussion about this using participatory methods with social movements or with organizations, so as it was said already before. And here, just to add a thought, I mean, maybe the thing is that participatory methods can and should be used only in specific contexts, right? And maybe the business, some business models or some business are not the right context to use that, you know. I mean, that's just a thought that I'm putting there. And then, so Tom was also saying that as usual also with other methods, but what these spaces are very important because you can talk about also the pitfalls, etc. Because usually what you read, what is published and has gone to the editing and publishing process is kind of it's kind of how do you say, so all the problems, the failures, etc. are kind of left away. And this is a huge problem of the whole publication system that should allow much more insecurity, much more talking about problems, about failures, and so on. And it's not only related to participatory methods, but in general to research. Actually, we read these idealized forms of research that don't exist in practice. And then there was again this issue of power relations, but in the sense of communities rejecting actually researchers because they represent the university, maybe like the technical knowledge, the expert knowledge, and people might be suspicious of that. And then another point was about like, and maybe here I add something usually that we didn't discuss, but so if the blurring of the researcher researched can be problematic for the researched people, as we have already discussed in the terms that have already been discussed. So it can be a big burden also for the researcher, right? In the sense that it really cuts into your personal and private life. And so if you are in the field in Kyrgyzstan, in my case, or maybe also for you, Marcus, when you are there, okay, you are totally a researcher, and then so all the friends you have are like part of your research. But that's a huge demand on us, actually. And we were discussing this last week with Ellie, who is also here. So about, maybe we can do that as PhDs when we are younger, but getting older. So that's a big demand on our private life also. Yeah, exactly. Maybe we'll stop here. Sorry. Julie, I don't know if you want to add something.
Yeah, thanks. No, that was a great summary. So thanks for starting that. I would just add, I mean, I thought it was interesting too, Otavia, you had a point about sort of how it can feel different depending on what type of interlocutor you're sort of working with, where somebody sort of with a more official position, I forget what position they had, or maybe you can summarize it better since it was your point. But I thought that was a good point to bring up.
I think it links to this idea that there might be context where power doesn't make sense, right? And I think in social movements it makes super sense, right? Because you can be actively involved, and but maybe. So in my case, it was, so I have like two, let's say, key informants, so like gatekeepers in my field right now. And one is the head of the economic affairs in the municipality, very little, where I'm working. So I contact her like in relation to her paid formal job. And then the other one is an environmental activist in the city. And somehow I was telling that I have much more shyness, but shyness in the sense that I feel much less bad in asking the time and to discuss with the activist than with the head of economic affairs, because I feel like that she is super busy in her work and she has so much to do, etc. Which is also problematic because somehow I feel better to steal the unpaid time of the activist than the paid time of the head of economic affairs, you know. So, but yeah, that's not a resolved question. It's just like a thing that, yeah, that I should maybe reflect more, and maybe you have like some better reflection on this.
But for me, it's pretty interesting to see, as far as I can see it, that at least you, Ottavia, and Eva kind of agree on this point of businesses versus social movements. That there are maybe some contexts that seem just to be more suitable, and it's interesting if others also think that way. I tend also to think about it like this, but I do also have to say, like, I'm not sure, like, maybe one shouldn't call it maybe participatory action research, but this kind of community economies thinking, I think there is a need to go to these organizations that are not like super democratic, super, I don't know, ecologically sound, socially unexploitative, but then is it participatory action research? Is it not? That's like, I'm not sure.
If I may just briefly say why I turned to this was that it's not necessarily that PAR would not be suitable for corporations, but it's mainly because in academia, the time pressures became stronger. I was explaining in our group that in the 90s and early 2000s, there was still a stronger movement of action research, not necessarily always, well, action research, that's a debate like where there was the participation and so forth. And then they did especially go to the business organizations that collaborated with people from the bottom up in the organizations. And of course, sometimes it was quite radical in these organizations, what happened, because other people came and listened and they gained agency and so forth. But that's a longer story, but anyhow, so I don't think it cannot be done. I think it can be done, but the way that our work as academics has been shaped, it has been more difficult to do the work.
Maybe, do you want to share another short story about that? I don't know, maybe from your personal experience or some others, because yeah, I would be just curious, you know.
Just to explain the radicalness of participatory methods is that, because I have a business school background now, I'm with the Department of Design. If you know the business schools, the way they talk about strategy and organizing businesses, mainly implicitly, even though they might say something else like personal is our strength, but in practice, it's from the perspective of the leadership and the leaders. Whereas with participatory methods, scholars can actually go to the people in various positions in the organization and gain trust and ask questions and build momentum to raise up issues. And that's the sort of the radical power of this that at times the leaders might not like. So this is at least what I have been talking with colleagues who have been able to do this type of work maybe 20 years ago. So these were their experiences. And sometimes the leaders liked it. So it's not always that they oppose, but but yes.
But it's funny because that's also, you know, like I had this idea of conducting some workshops, and then some of these organizations, I didn't even ask about it because I was like, you know, like in their whole business life, they're not talking on eye level. Why should I conduct right now a workshop and pretending as if they were on eye level, talking about whatsoever desirable and undesirable aspects from their perspectives, like waste of time, maybe even dangerous, who knows? You know, you really have to, it's maybe even dangerous to do these kind of things.
And the radicalness, I think, how my colleagues have explained it and how I understand it is that we as scholars might also go with an agenda, but then when we actually talk with people, they might come up with something not completely different, but something a bit different that are whatever theme. Like it's the process, not necessarily the content, that might actually be the main thing that happens in these collaborations.
Okay, I would just suggest to move also to the last group, which I think was Anna and Ellie, right?
Yeah, I can start and maybe Ellie, you can jump in. Yeah, we had the conversation on the dark side of PAR. And I think we both kind of agreed that we didn't, in our work at least, see a very dark side necessarily, because yeah, we both are sort of able to yeah, work with the participants in a way that I think is also okay for them. But yeah, for me, what I was sort of yeah, struggling with a bit is to use the term PAR in the right way or something, because yeah, I work personally with participants who are very interested in the research, and that's like what they also think is important, and that happens. But then for me, there's a very strong action component, because I'm also working with the social movement, but not so much a participatory yeah, the aspect of that is a bit more blurry, and to see, yeah, how much am I actually participating, and am I really like a part of it? Is this really like democratic research in that sense? And yeah, I think Ellie was talking about more about also the distribution of labor and who does what and where the burden of the work lies. And I think, yeah, Otavia also touched upon this before in saying that sometimes the burden is very heavily on the researcher. And I also sort of experienced that a bit, because I also yeah, take that role, especially because of this participatory action research, that I don't want to burden them unnecessarily. So I put a lot of effort in communicating and yeah, offering my labor for free if that helps me get data. Yeah, and yeah, so I think it also came up a bit, is that ethical towards the researcher? Then maybe is that like not exploitative? Maybe a bit. And I think Otavia, what you said, yeah, maybe I resonated with that, because as a PhD, I feel like, oh yeah, but I'm just lowly PhD, so I should just put in the work. But yeah, indeed, if you're not a PhD anymore, and maybe even if you are a PhD who wants to have a healthy work-life balance, it is something to think about, I think. And then, yeah, so about the dark side, I do think that is a very interesting also topic to be explored, but we didn't really go into really the dark side, because it wasn't super relevant for us. But yeah, I think, I don't know if you have anything to add, Ellie.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of this, and maybe jumping on from what Otavia said as well earlier. So I think we made a really interesting point, Anna, as well, that, you know, not all participants are exploitable in the same degree. I think that was a very interesting thing to maybe, you know, I kind of thought about this in two ways. The first time is obviously we go back to the conversation of it depends what groups you're working with. But it also made me think of, you know, when you said not, sometimes we use power as if it's a kind of revolutionary approach. And of course it's not, and we know the pitfalls, and we know the difficulties with delivering impact, and we know that power relations are inescapable in any form of research. But at the same time, I think when you enter a room and you're full of, you know, quantitative positivist researcher, you realize that actually what you do, I think it's contextualized, you know, what you do might be a little bit revolutionary, because to some people it's just not the kind of research that they do. You still have a lot of academia that thinks that participants are subjects to be categorized, and that they don't have an opinion on, you know, the life that they actually live out. So I thought that was an interesting perspective to add to that. And the messiness of fieldwork as well is something I wanted to maybe just add. As Otavia said, we read things that underplay the messiness of any form of fieldwork, let alone, you know, participatory action research or just participatory methods. But when you try and grapple with this and you kind of write about it, I also feel this puts us in a position of vulnerability, where as PhD students or as early career researchers, we are the one trying to show authenticity and, you know, kind of reflect on how difficult research might have been and reflect on the failures and the mistakes and the messiness. But we are the ones with very little social capital and very little resources and, you know, academic publications behind us. So I thought there's kind of a political terrain here of struggle that we maybe need to kind of also, you know, engage with. And then, yeah, the last thing we talked about was well-being as well, and this kind of opposition between well-being of the researcher and how much kind of work PAR can represent for us, and well-being of participants that I think can become very complementary instead of put in opposition, which is usually the case in kind of ethics committees. But which also goes back to the question of who bears the cost of research. You know, is it the institutions? Are we redistributing institutional resources if we have access to any of those? Or is it also the communities that we work with? And, you know, when Otavia, you mentioned, you know, we're friends with those people, we're embedded in those kind of contexts that we study. We're part of the social world that we study with. You know, this kind of bears so much cost in terms of the participants, you know, the information they give us, the friendship that they share with us, the roof sometimes that they put over our head, in my case, the food on the table, the political discussions, the kind of the home they provide for us. I think all of this needs to be acknowledged as well. I'll finish on this.
Can I just ask a clarifying question for this last group? Since I was quite intrigued that you feel like you've been able to sort of successfully work with participants in this way. And I'm wondering if either of you have had some sort of training in this, or if you've just kind of figured it out in the field.
Yeah, I haven't had any training. I've read a lot about it. And I think, yeah, for me, the success, again, also really lies with the participants. So I don't want to claim any of that for myself. Because, yeah, I work with a pretty privileged group of kind of highly educated individuals who all really care about research and really care about like furthering my research because they think it's important for them. So in that sense, I've just been able to kind of also establish a guidance committee from the field with experts in the topic that I'm working with, but then from the field, and have them actually guide me in their free time and see if what I'm doing is relevant for them and how it can help. And I'm working very closely together with some people who are also working in these organizations that are facilitating food forests, which is my topic. And everyone just has a lot of energy and a lot of time apparently to like help me be kind of involved and engaged in that way. So I think I just lucked out, to be honest. Like it's kind of like beginner's luck maybe with the participatory action research. And yeah, so I think that's kind of how or where my success stems from. I don't know about you, Ellie.
Yeah, I think that the difference for me is that I've worked in the groups that I then studied with or worked with again in research for 10 years. So I had known them for quite a while. So when I kind of, I knew from the beginning that the, you know, participants would be integrated into the research design. And so from the beginning, it kind of then flowed into more participatory research. Training, there was a little bit of training delivered in the university with people who've done like amazing forms of research, but I think it really depends on your participants and it's very context specific. I don't know whether, and I say one point that I'd like to make is that I don't think there's one form of participatory research. There's very different ways you can integrate participatory elements. So mine is not a full-fledged PAR, but rather integrating, you know, so for example, suggestions into research design, participant observation, certain things, but, you know, I didn't ask participants to collect data or to write up because that just would not have been convenient and that would not have been possible. So I think it's just about picking up the things that you can actually engage with or engage participants with, if that answers your question.
Yeah, very much. Thank you.
And I'll also just take over from here because I really want to, like, I will first of all want to thank everyone for the reporting, which I found really nice. Now we have another 6 minutes and I want to end on time. I had this slow idea, or I had this idea about talking about what next to do with it. And I have to admit, like 2 months ago, I was over enthusiastic and I was saying, you know, after such a session, maybe we can write something about it. But right now, I don't feel myself about it. But what I can already tell from myself, maybe in after 1-2 months, I could think about making from some of these points something like a 3-4 pager, send it around and see if anyone wants to jump on or not. But I also want to just open the floor. Maybe it's not about this what next to do, but you know, just like how you like the session and what you think should emerge out of that. And even if nothing would emerge out of that, just like if you just reflect on how you, I'm not sure if you're like me starting the day, but if it helped you starting the day or not.
Yeah, thanks, Marcus, for the session. I thought it was really, really interesting to hear other people's experiences with PAR, because for me, it is still sort of new territory. And yeah, I don't know, I talked to a lot of people about like content related things or topics and not so much about methodology. And recently I've really felt a need to do that, actually. So I think for me, it was really nice to have this discussion just about, yeah, the pitfalls and the challenges that come with PAR. And yeah, for me also, I'm definitely not done talking about it yet. So I don't know what follow-up steps should be, but I'm very interested to continue the conversation in one shape or form.
Does anyone else want to share something?
Yeah, no, thank you for organizing the session, Marcus. It was really great and really nice to sort of meet everyone here and hear your experiences. I just have maybe a suggestion that we could use this sort of, I guess we have like an email thread now with people in this session that people could share sort of links or readings or something in as we continue, perhaps, to keep the discussion going as one way. Yeah.
I mean, the aftermath also for those who couldn't attend, at least I got also 1-2 mails about people who wanted to attend but couldn't. Maybe I can also just send around again this pad and then let's see what happens. I mean, I was just also intrigued, I think, by the point, I think it was you, Ellie, who raised it in the sense of, you know, like, do we have the social capital as early career researchers to talk about our vulnerabilities and failures? I don't know. My impression actually is that at least a time is coming where it's getting more acceptable also to do it. But on the other hand, I see also the point that, yeah, maybe there are also some issues involved with it. But I would love to see actually more of that kind of a scholarship where you see like, okay, it just doesn't work. I can say like I was super amazed by this Latrobe Valley project in Australia, which maybe some of you know. I can also send around the DOI, and I was super amazed, but I just looked at it and I felt bad reading it at some point because it was like, okay, everything worked out perfectly there. It's heaven on earth. And actually that can also lead to some kind of, I don't know, psychological distress.
Yeah, totally. And I agree with you, Marcus, that it seems that at least in some milieus, so it gets more and more accepted that, so we speak also about the failures, etc. But I also think, so we were discussing this in several contexts of not necessarily about participatory research, but that's a much broader topic. But so, and then we were discussing, so what can we do actually as I mean, except of speaking about our own failures, which sometimes is a bit challenging, as Ellie was saying, but also demand this from other people, right? So when we review papers, when we review or like supervise the work of students, when we, well, that's a bit that's maybe a bit challenging. But when we hear a presentation from a professor, you know, like, okay, that's a bit challenging, but sometimes, yeah, but really engage and ask the questions, because everybody has like some failure behind, right?
That's a cool thing, which we can really do also on a everyday basis. So I will add this also maybe to this document because I like this idea also to engage, like in, could be already bachelor thesis supervision, right? To slowly change it from somewhere. But yeah, I said I want to end punctually. I want to really thank you all for your participation, and I hope you liked it yourself. And I will send around the pad later, so enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.